We'll continue with the Prajna Paramita. We are, as I said, nearing a conclusion, but as I continue to find good texts, I will keep it going a little bit before we start something new. One of the things that I've been working on is this idea, we talked about this earlier, that the idea of wisdom and this wisdom tradition, this Prajna Paramita literature, with the feminine voice and the notion of wisdom in many different aspects being this sort of very central force in human life and in the world. That it was a joint kind of tradition that came out both in the East and the West. That about the first century before Christ, we start to get wisdom literature in Jewish tradition and in the Buddhist tradition. And this would go on for several hundred years in both of the traditions. And when I thought about this, I realized that by the time you get people writing the Gospels, which is, the late first century AD, and this wisdom literature has been circulating for 2 centuries. And I think the Christians borrowed quite a bit of it. It was, in my mind, there's sort of both things happening at the same time. There's sort of this incarnation of wisdom in the world. And then a little bit later, there's the incarnation of sort of the Christ figure who represents sort of goodness and love, and a divine sort of love. But the wisdom incarnation has been somewhat suppressed, under the triumph of the Christian tradition. And the Christian tradition had the characteristic, and the way these two traditions differ in some sense is that the Christian tradition was very patriarchal, and particularly at the time when they started assembling literature. Not so much necessarily when Jesus walked the earth or someone like him walked the earth, but in the 4th century, by the time these things were being finalized, and it was very much the men were in charge. So I think in some ways they actually stole some of the literature. And I'll look particularly at I was reading some verses of John, because I was meditating on the idea of wisdom is similar to the idea of truth. So it's the truth of things as they are, but it's the truth in our lives, it's the truth in the nation, it's the truth of all things. It's the truth on how a car works, or how you write a letter. I mean, the truth is just how it is. And in the Christian tradition, of course, they say, well, the idea is that you worship God in spirit and in truth. So then, if you read what's written in John, you'll see that it's very famous verses here, but there's something has been altered. So let me read. This is from the John chapter 4 and chapter 5. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipper shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. And then later, God is a spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And then in John 5:6, and it is the spirit that beareth witness, because the spirit is truth. So John is giving God and Christ this mantle of bearers of the spirit of truth. But the actual text, let me read you the original before John borrowed from it. It would go something like this, I believe. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipper shall worship wisdom in spirit and in truth. For wisdom seeketh such to worship her. Wisdom is a spirit, and they that worship her must worship her in spirit and in truth. And it is the spirit wisdom that beareth witness, because the spirit wisdom is truth.
What
that makes a lot more sense. First of all, we know what wisdom is. We know what truth is, so that putting the two together is coherent. In John's version, it is not coherent. You can tell, and that's why you can tell that he's borrowed. God is a spirit. Well, what do we bring God in at this point? I mean, there's a spirit is there. It doesn't, you can try and tie it into the Jewish God, but it's just sort of being, put on with
like a quilt,
Scotch tape,
tape stitched together.
And the spirit bears witness. Well, the spirit is just energy. So what spirit bears witness? The spirit of wisdom bears witness. Now that makes sense. The spirit of truth bears witness. That should be, awareness bears witness. Those would make sense. So I think that you can see when this is an idea. The original tradition is really this tradition of wisdom now coming into the world. And that's what we inherit because it took a different path in the West, although it's not altogether absent. At least in the East, it's connected still with the feminine voice. It occurred to me in as I was thinking about wisdom this week that there were 3 levels of wisdom. So I wanted to talk about that, and then we'll go on to the text that I brought with me. There is the everyday level of wisdom in the world. Wisdom in the physical world. How things, knowing how things work, seeing the truth of phenomena. And there's also the sense, not just that things have a certain kind of logic to them, and logic is sort of is the ordered aspect of truth that appears to us in our world. That wisdom or truth is flowing through nature, it's flowing through objects, and it flows through us. And as it flows through us, it actually can speak. It can take the form of, say, teachers. It could take the form of good friends, those that we're close to and that we listen to. And so both the phenomenal world as a whole and the individual humans, our compatriots within this world, all have wisdom flowing through us. So that is how wisdom appears in our lives, in this world, in this reality. And in this world, it takes 2 forms. It takes the physical form, or nature, and it takes the mental form. And there's sort of obviously very nuanced and indescribable interplay between mental and physical realities, which we won't totally go into. But it's just that our thoughts are also part of the form world. So there's mental form, there's physical form, and yet this form has within it the light of wisdom. It has a truth to it. The next level of wisdom is the Bhavakaya level, which is the level of radiance. But we'll skip to the Dharmakaya because generally in some versions, like when you look in Nargajana, there's only the Dharmakaya and then the Manakaya levels that are discussed. The Dharmakaya is a non-dual, non-relational. It's all and everything and nothing in particular. It's suchness. It's the Dzogpa Chenpo. And it's emptiness. So that's the emptiness that's the counterpart to form. So in the Prajnaparamita Sutra, we say form is emptiness and emptiness itself is form. Is that in this view, reality has both physical, mental form, but that form is permeated by emptiness. It has no substance. It has no permanence. It has no. Its essential nature is the Dharmakaya. When the Yogacharans adopted and adapted the Prajnaparamita, then they added a middle layer, which is the Sambhogakaya. Remember, the three kayas are Yogacara doctrine, not a Prajnaparamita one per se. So the idea of Sambhogakaya is that there's between emptiness and form reality, physical and mental, there is a sphere of radiance or luminosity. And this is something that's picked up in the Tibetan tradition. All of Vajrayana and Dzogchen has this as its background understanding, that there is a kind of luminous wisdom. In fact, in some depictions of ultimate reality, like in the Gelugpa tradition, ultimate reality is called the clear light. So there's the clear light, and then there's the radiant, illuminated light, or luminosity. So luminosity or radiance, this is what I posited at the beginning of the course, is Prajnaparamita. That's where wisdom rests. Wisdom is the radiance or luminosity of the transcendent, or the light of heaven, if you want. And it's the light of heaven, it's also the clarity of heaven, because it's a divine light. And it's also the light of truth. And it's when we sync up with the truth of things, it's like having wisdom, being whispered into our ears. And sometimes when wisdom is whispered into our ears, and we will have that experience as well. And wisdom is very gentle. It's a very quiet voice. It doesn't shout at us. If it's shouting at us, it's usually probably a Freudian representation of our mother or father or something like that. But wisdom would be more quiet. Voice, and gentle. So interestingly enough, the heavenly realm, in terms of its radiance and luminosity, is mythologically, it's sort of outside of us. The heavens are like, beyond the atmosphere and so forth. But experientially, it's on the inside of us. The celestial is our inner psychic nature. And then there's kind of a light part of it, and there's a dark part of it. And there's like inner senses and inner planets and constellations. So there's a whole kind of sense of inner realities that are expressed metaphorically as kind of these celestial heavens. So all of the energies of the deities are within us. And they always appear within us in terms of our own inner experience through our inner senses. So those are the three levels of wisdom. And really, of course, as we know, there's a fourth kaya called the Svabhavakaya, but we could just call that the no kaya. And the no kaya means that all kayas, first of all, there's no such thing as kayas. It's just a way to help you structure, help you understand the energies that are present at each moment. So each moment, what's present to our experience? Space, light, and objects. And that's it. So that's what we got. The three kayas all at once, every moment. There's always going to be space, always going to be light, sometimes not much of it, and there's always going to be objects. And the more light, the better we'll see the objects, and the less light, the more likely we'll bang into them, like when we get up at night and walk around. So that's those are levels of wisdom. The two texts I have tonight, the first is a praise of wisdom text. We did the 108 names of Prajnaparamita before. This one is a little shorter but very nice, heartfelt text. The praise of perfect wisdom. You have all copies of this. I'll just read it. I won't put it up. I pay homage to the perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom gives light. She is unstained, and the whole world cannot stain her. From everyone in the triple world, she removes darkness and leads them away from the blinding darkness caused by defilements and wrong views. In her there is shelter. Most excellent are all her works. She leads us to the safety of the wings of enlightenment. She brings light to the blind, so that all fear and distress may be forsaken. She has gained the 5 eyes, and she shows the path to all beings. She herself is an organ of vision. She disperses the gloom and darkness of delusion. She guides to the path all those who have strayed onto a bad road. She is identical with all knowledge. She does not create or oppose anything. She is the mother of bodhisattvas because of her absence of self-nature. She cannot be crushed. She protects the unprotected with the 4 grounds of confidence. She is the antidote to birth and death. She has a clear knowledge of the self-natures of all dharmas and does not stray from it. Truly, it is the perfection of wisdom of the Buddhas that sets in motion the wheel of Dharma.
Is this from one of Kanza's compilations, or?
This is an edited version of one of Kanza's translations. The nice one about this one is, again, like the last one I read, you substitute the word wisdom and it all works. It also works if you see wisdom as kind of a special spirit, like we just talked about, but it also works very well in a conventional sense. But this idea of wisdom, wisdom does not create or oppose anything. Wisdom is simply clarifying things. And she's the mother of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. She's the mother of gods and deities. And think of it, if you had a deity or a Buddha or a Bodhisattva who was not one with wisdom, they would be a terrible Buddha or Bodhisattva. It wouldn't be good at all. It wouldn't be much of a god either. So it's one of those things where you don't have wisdom, you have nothing. So that's the basic metaphor, is that she can protect the unprotected because she's got the unprotected at least have truth on their sides, and that truth can give them some measure of confidence. And truth is the antidote to birth and death. Now here we're talking about the transcendent truth of knowing the unborn nature of transcendent reality. And she's the mother of bodhisattvas because of the absence of self-nature. She is completely selfless. All the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, by definition, by nature, come out of selflessness. That's a basic foundation for a Buddha or a Bodhisattva. So wisdom has this quality of being selfless. When you speak the truth, that's selfless. When you shape the truth, shade the truth, completely discard the truth, beat it around the head constantly, as some people do, that's lost my metaphor there.
You're throwing yourself in the way in those cases.
And when you start beating truth around, there's obviously a strong sense of narcissism going on there, heavy on the self, because truth gets in the way of yourself. So bang it around and see if you can't stretch it and get it to. But it never works. It can't work. A lie has no staying power. So this is a beautiful little phrase of perfect wisdom. Any other questions?
It's really beautiful.
That I just want to hear more about.
And she even gets the attribution that if it wasn't for wisdom, the Buddhas wouldn't even be turning the wheel of Dharma to begin with. So the Buddhas being bodhisattvas really become these vessels for wisdom to pass through. Of course, we also then our highest is to also be vessels for which truth or wisdom can pass. So it's important that you have a sense of truth in the world, and that not just transcendent truth, which is of course invaluable, but because we're embodied still in situations that require awareness and response, we're also vessels of truth in the world. And hopefully there'll be enough vessels of truth that we can survive our current calamities.
That's
one of the last few lines there is probably like the best marketing gimmick of the whole thing. She is the antidote to birth and death. I mean, people perk up when they hear that, because it's like
everybody wants an antidote to death.
Yeah.
Right. But the vaccine you've always had.
I'm going to tell you the rest of my story if we have time.
Simply with being created. Yeah.
Let me go through before we get to that, let me go through the next text here, and then we open up we just discuss what we want. Okay. This next text is one of the ones where they're being very careful how they use language. And nowadays, when you have language philosophers post Wittgenstein and that since World War II and in modern days, this kind of thing where you're having a discussion on several levels of reality and levels are referring to realities and meta realities and explanations and meta explanations and meta understandings. That's understood, but this was 2,000 years ago. And it wasn't until the last 70 years that anyone in the West even talked this way, that we would understand what is being presented here because of the use of levels of reality. That whole idea is foreign to someone who only has a literal sense of reality or a dogmatic sense of reality, which is pretty much the same thing. The Elusiveness of Perfect Wisdom. Subhuti. Deep is the essential original nature of dharmas. The Lord. It is through their essential original nature that those dharmas are not the something. Their nature is no nature, and their no nature is their nature. Because all dharmas have one mark only, that is, no mark. It is thus that all points of attachment are abandoned. Deep, O Lord, is the perfection of wisdom, the Lord replies, through a depth like that of space. Subhuti, hard to understand, O Lord, is this perfection of wisdom, the Lord, because nothing is known by the enlightened. Subhuti, unthinkable, O Lord, is the perfection of wisdom, the Lord, because the perfection of wisdom is not something that thought has access to. Subhuti, uncreated, O Lord, is the perfection of wisdom, the Lord, because no creator can be apprehended. Subhuti, how then, under these circumstances, should a bodhisattva course in perfect wisdom? The Lord, a Buddha courses in perfect wisdom if while coursing he does not course in the skandhas, or if he does not course in the conviction that the skandhas are permanent, or that they are empty, or that they are defective or complete. And if he does not even course in the conviction that form is neither partial nor complete reality, and so for the other skandhas, then he courses in perfect wisdom. Subhuti, how well the reasons bodhisattvas have for attachment and non-attachment have been explained. The Lord, one courses well in perfect wisdom if one courses without attachment or non-attachment, and so for the other skandhas. It is thus that bodhisattvas should course in perfect wisdom, rising above attachment altogether. Subhuti, it is wonderful, O Lord, how deep the perfection of wisdom is. Demonstration does not increase it, and non-demonstration does not diminish it. The Lord, well said, Subhuti. It is just as the Tathagata should, during his whole life, speak of space without increase to the volume of space, nor does space diminish when he does not speak of it. Subhuti, the development of perfect wisdom is like the development of space. Homage should be paid to those bodhisattvas who are armed with this armor, and who win full enlightenment with effort that is like space, for the sake of beings who are like space. But this particular text, the elusiveness of perfect wisdom, this is sort of as transcendent as it gets. That fantastic ending where everything is like space, and bodhisattvas who are like space are putting on the armor of space so they can save beings who are like space. The idea of coursing in this transcendent space, that there is no attachment, there's no non-attachment. Because there is no attachment, there is no non-attachment either. One is not bound by any view, concept, edification, or reification of anything. One is just there, coursing in pure present suchness. So that's what a being does, and that suchness is empty, and it's like space, and yet, of course, as we know, it's full of radiant phenomena as well. So that's the elusiveness of perfect wisdom. You can't get at it by thought because it's not something thought has access to. That's what makes wisdom elusive. It speaks through you. It's not something you figure out on your own. It's not something you go and grab from somewhere. It's not something where you take wisdom's knowledge and knock her over in like street crime, grab her a purse and run, grab her insights and go. But you have to become this vessel, this willingness to be someone who's honest and speaks the truth, and wisdom will talk to you. And if you're lying son of a bitch, then you're not going to get much wisdom going to come your way. Not to name names. So if you have any comments or questions,
Just
It's a great.
Can you hear me?
uh-huh.
Okay. I was curious. Sorry about the cat bomb. I'm not really sure where that came from. So you said something about lies being intrinsically sort of not. Oh, I don't know. You said like they don't stick around. In what context do you find that to be true?
Well, essentially, it's one of the there's one of the lines in my this book I just wrote is that truth has this advantage: it doesn't have to sustain itself. See, a lie has to be continually repeated. It has to because it doesn't have any natural. It's not the natural state of things. So you're basically gaslighting someone, and so you have to keep doing that. Otherwise, it's like it has a half-life. Reality seeps back through again. So you can lie to people, but like what Abraham, like you can fool people, all the people some of the time, and some of the people all the time, and not all the people all the time. Lies do not endure.
the truth has a power all of its own.
And do you think the course of history really shows that? Because it seems like since we're all deluded, I don't know. It seems like we can wander around in delusion for millions of lifetimes.
Oh well, but lying, it's always a new lie. The truth is stays the same, but lies continually change. It's sort of like when Trump was being impeached. I mean, there was one truth to what happened, and then there were the 100 accounts that Trump gave of what happened. Because every time you give an account, everyone said, "No, that doesn't even plausible." And you go, "All right, well, how about this then?" And you get so lies just have to keep being manufactured because. But there is actually only one truth. I mean, things did.
So you don't think that reality has a point where, I mean, you really do think there really is just one truth. So if you've got, so when you have a disagreement with Terry and she thinks that you actually broke the plate and you said, no, I didn't break the plate. There's absolutely a point where that's too concrete. You really think that there's not a chance that people can actually be in their own movies at a level where two different things happen? You really think there's just really one that there's an absolute truth about an event that happens, that there's no possibility. I mean, like that famous movie where was it Rashomon?
Yeah. No, I don't. I don't ascribe to that. That's too relativistic.
Okay.
I think that there is the actual state of things is something that only a Buddha can see. So what actually is happening, and particularly in the spousal example, is that neither of these being at that moment, particularly maybe at that moment when they're going to have a little conflict, are not particularly Buddha moments, right? So neither of them are synced with reality, and we're not getting a totally true account of things. We're getting a bit of a self-colored account of things, and that's our problem. Is we can't, it's very hard to go and count things that doesn't have a certain amount of self-coloring, even very subtle self-coloring. It can get as subtle as subtle can get. So yeah, we have a certain tendency to see things a certain way, and particularly when it comes to what emphasis you put on stuff. It's not so much that I broke the plate or I didn't break the plate. I mean, the angels in the room will testify as to whether what happened there. But the value I place on that deed, or the emphasis I place on that, now that's going to be very personal. Like, to me, having just broken the plate, it was nothing. my wife, for whom that probably has some special meaning. It might be, how can I live? So, but that's not a question of fact. That's just a question of value. You know what I mean? So we'd have totally different values. I agree on that. But the truth of the thing is not our emotional response to it so much as what there's a kind of very factual nature, objective nature to things.
Well, given the fact that we're, like you said, it's basically an ideal, though, because everybody is traveling in and out of different states of clarity and illusion and delusion. So it's basically an ideal.
Yes.
So.
But also a continuum. So some of us are on different points of the continuum. Some of us see things pretty clearly, particularly, in terms of political, social, financial, there's all sorts of, depending on the person.
So you're pretty, okay. So you would, in a general sort of sense, you might give that in a general way, but then of course, if you're attributing that to a person, you're saying, that's where it gets that's where it starts getting tricky, because you get so wrapped up in points of view and personalities, and again, it kind of, I mean,
yeah, I think the whole point of our practice is that you could somewhat step out of that. You can step out of it for periods of time, and you can lessen it most of the time. And by doing that, stepping out of it and also lessening it, you become a pretty good, reliable witness to reality. Now, many people are delusional. They're not at all. I mean, they might be good witnesses to reality of like what happened, in the last half hour. They mean local events. They're pretty good and accurate witnesses, but they have no idea of things they don't have any experience of. Their idea of anything outside of local events is something they get from television. Now, that's also true of all of us too. We're getting all our knowledge outside of, of course, we're talking to each other, and there's various ways in which you learn how to parse outside information. And that's the difference, is that generally we're all pretty good witnesses of local events, unless we have a self-interest in them. But where we're relying on information that's not firsthand, then it gets kind of that's very difficult, because then it's a matter of who do you
trust, who do you believe?
Yeah. And of course, I believe in the New York Times, and they have not always been worthy of my belief, but generally they're my standard of what's likely happening in the world. Fox News is close to total fantasy.
And so that's where the final line in this ends up, where he talks about effort that is like space for the sake of beings who are like space. And so that addresses the three spheres of self and other and action. And,
where's that part?
It's the last line.
Oh yeah, okay.
I love the space metaphors when they well, it starts up at the very top. It's such a beautiful piece here. So Hudi, who of course he's representing the Abhidharma, and so he's knowledge. So he's like an academic, and the Buddha is a spontaneous person coursing in the moment of direct intuitive realization. And Subhuti as an intellect, or as mind, is that type of mind, or an intellectual mind, the academic mind we have, or knowledge-based mind. It can appreciate the transcendent, but it has trouble being the transcendent. So that's the nature of this dialogue here. So Subhuti is just kind of, out of his element in the transcendent space of the Buddha. So all he can do is make these kind of adolescent exclamations, deep is the essential original nature of the Dharmas, which doesn't tell you anything about the Dharmas. It just tells you that it's deep. It's a statement about his awe. But then the Buddha is playing off of all these statements, which are Subhuti's going through kind of these traditional Indian phrases, and the Buddha is just playing with him. So the first one says, "Deep is the essential original nature," and he says, "Yes, but that original nature is not anything. In fact, it's not a nature at all, and it's because things don't have a nature that is their nature." And dharmas have, in fact, one common mark, and that is that there's no mark, that they're united by the fact that their essence is space, like space. It's pure openness. And because of that, because there's nothing substantial there, there's nothing actually enduring in form, then all attachment is abandoned. And so he goes on, again, deep, O Lord, is this perfection of wisdom. And again, the Buddha doesn't want to make something out of this particular teaching. So he says, yes, this teaching is deep. It's deep like space. There's nothing there. And then he goes right on to that. Hard to understand, O Lord, is the perfection of wisdom, because he's not getting it yet, right? Mm-hmm. And then Buddha replies, because nothing is known of there's not, see, Subhuti thinks there's something like, an academic, there's something you can get, you can study, you can grasp, you can understand in the way that you've understood all these things. I just had to do a biography for my grandson, and I had to list like all my, technical and skills. It was a long list because, it's hard to make a buck, but you have to keep changing and learning new things. But that's not that kind of thing. It's not like, well, I used to know plumbing, now I'm going to pick up electrical, I'm going to do drywalling, and so, I'm going to be a master of all trades. And just if I need to pick up another one, I pick up another one. So that's the world Subhuti's coming from. You just, acquiring, you accumulate knowledge. But this is knowledge itself. This is the principle that underlies wisdom. It's the wisdom of the moment. So it's the best. It's not secondhand, and it's not retrospective. It's the wisdom of now. So yes, Subhuti's not getting that at all. And so then this idea that nothing can be known in the conventional way, that you just have to be it. So he says, unthinkable, O Lord, is the perfection of wisdom. Now he's getting a little closer. So the Lord Buddha says, yes, because the perfection of wisdom is not something that thought has access to. It's not something that thought has access to. It's not something that has been created. It's unborn. It's uncreated. So at this point, Subhuti throws in the towel, and he says, okay, how do I experience? He realizes that he's not getting it. He says, how do I experience this transcendence? And he experiences it by neither believing nor not believing anything, either affirming nor denying anything, not holding any particular view at all, but actually kind of stepping outside this whole idea of there being things to acquire, something to gain and lost, all duality, increase and decrease, all dualities. Just step out of the whole thing altogether. That is coursing in perfect wisdom. And that is to have the peace, the contentment, and the completeness of space awareness itself. When Subhuti says, "It is wonderful, O Lord, how deep the perfection of wisdom is. Demonstration does not increase it, and non-demonstration does not diminish it."
Mm-hmm.
At that point, he realized that it's been demonstrated to him. The Buddha's just shown him what it is in the way he's responded. And that's what's really neat about these texts is they demonstrate what they talk about. They within the text itself is that transcendent leap. At least it's shown. You're shown how to take that leap.
Really that, so that wisdom of the now has to do with appearance and how we react to it, or
Wisdom in the now has a foreground and a background. If you go back to earlier. So the foreground is the phenomenal, and the background is space. So as you're in the phenomenal, you're not lost in the phenomenal, you're not submerged in the phenomenal, but you're engaged in the phenomenal, but you're also aware of the space, the background around things. And because of that, the space-like awareness of the Dharmakaya, then you also have the light and radiance of wisdom with you as you engage the phenomenal.
and because one of the Buddha's first teachings was like in the Dhammapada, where he talks about basically that the world depends on thought. Like if you're happy, happiness follows you, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
A good heart or whatever. And so, so that means that besides just, being in the background, watching, and seeing the foreground, you're actually influencing maybe what you're seeing, in that way.
Well, yeah, it's a mutual co-creation. The phenomenal world is self-creating, and you're part of the phenomenals. You're creating along with it, and particularly within the sphere that you occupy, you're a pretty significant creative.
And so that means like our deepest, most subtle propensities need to be like in a positive manner or something. Otherwise you're going to just react, negatively or something.
Yes, it's actually quite important to generate that kind of positive energy and positive thought. Not so much. I'm not a fan of positive thought anymore. There was before I was, but that's very big in Christian Science. This idea of generating positive thought, and Unity had that too with their affirmations, and they have and even some forms of Buddhism have all these kinds of affirmations. As to that's fine. I mean, it's a little.
It's just more of a benevolence, than positive or something.
Yeah, I think you want to generate warmth and benevolence and just a friendliness towards all sentient, towards all nature, not just the sentient beings, but everything. Well, everything is sentient. So it's not trees and stones and statues, and everything has a certain kind of sentience. Because we have sentience, we give it sentience. There's lots of, all the awareness that we generate creates a field of awareness in which everything rests.
Bruce, do you think?
Bruce,
Oh, go ahead.
Wisdom also has sentience, yes.
Wisdom is a self-existing intelligence that has been present since everything, before the beginning, and and will be present after the end. Unless the world is eternal, in which case it's always here. Yeah, wisdom is primordial. It's part of the structure of the universe and the structure of ourselves, which is the same thing. That there's space, there's light, and there's form. At the most basic level. And that's a different view of reality than ordinary reality. Ordinary reality is that there's form and there's emotion. There's no light, there's no space. There's form, and then there's my feeling about that form. And that's as far as it gets. And, and then we argue about how we feel about form, which is, like I said, that, how do we feel about that plate, when it broke? So we're arguing, we have arguments about feelings and values and priorities and emphasis and stuff like that, because it's all in the realm of emotion and feeling. But light in space, that's what we really want to connect with. That's what lifts us out of just the circularity and dull repetitiveness of these continual arguments about emotion and form that we and entanglements in emotion and form that we get ourselves into.
Awesome.